The moment my brother handed me that envelope, he was smiling. Not the kind of smile you give someone you love. The kind you give someone right before you watch them fall. I didn't open it right away. I was 31 years old, standing in my father's living room, surrounded by people who had known me my entire life, and something in my gut told me to wait. To read the room before I read whatever was inside. My brother's name is Derek. He's 4 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he has been the one my mother called first. The one whose name she said with a different kind of softness. I used to think it was just the way things were. Oldest child, first love, loudest presence. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself that for a long time. My father's name is Gerald. He built a trucking logistics company from nothing. Started with 2 trucks and a handshake deal in rural Ohio when he was 26 years old. By the time I was born, there were 40 trucks and a regional contract with 3 distribution warehouses. By the time I graduated college, there were over 100 routes, a staff of 60, and his name on a building in downtown Columbus. He was not a perfect man. He was quiet in ways that sometimes felt like distance. But he showed up. Every school event, every early morning, every hard conversation. He showed up. Derek never had much patience for the business. He liked the idea of it. The name, the money, the weight a last name carries in a room, but the actual work, the dispatching calls at 4 a.m., the contract negotiations, the driver disputes, the fuel cost breakdowns, none of that interested him. He'd come into the office when he wanted something. He left when it got complicated. I started working there at 19, not because my father asked me to, because I wanted to understand what he had built. I worked dispatch for 2 summers. Then I moved into operations, then logistics coordination. By the time I was 28, I was running route optimization for the entire Southern Division. My father didn't give me that role. I earned it by staying late when everyone else went home and by solving a fuel routing problem that had been costing the company $11,000 a month for 3 years. Derek noticed when I got that promotion. That was the first time I remember seeing something shift in his face. Not anger exactly, something colder, like he had just realized a game was being played that he hadn't known about. The envelope was his opening move. I opened it that evening, after the family dinner my mother had organized for my father's 62nd birthday. Derek had handed it to me as people were putting on coats, making it feel casual, last minute, like an afterthought. He said, "Almost forgot. Got something for you. Something I think you should know." Inside was a photograph, old, printed on the kind of paper they used in the 90s, slightly faded at the edges. A man I didn't recognize, standing in front of what looked like a bar or a roadside restaurant. Dark hair, medium build, a smile that had a looseness to it. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 4 words. "This is your father." I stood in the kitchen alone for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't what Derek expected. I don't think I felt what most people would feel. I didn't feel my legs go weak. I didn't feel the floor shift. What I felt was something closer to stillness, like when you've been hearing a noise in the background for so long that you've stopped registering it, and then suddenly the noise stops and the silence is so sharp it almost hurts. I had wondered once when I was maybe 16. My mother said something offhand during an argument, one of those things parents say when they're tired and angry and not thinking about what they're releasing into the air. She walked it back immediately, laughed it off. I let her because I was 16 and I didn't want it to be true. And sometimes the easiest thing is to decide something wasn't said. But it was said, and I had carried it quietly for 15 years. I didn't call Derek that night. I didn't call anyone. I went home, sat with the photograph on the kitchen table, and I thought about my father. Not the man in the picture. Gerald. The man who drove me to the emergency room at 2 in the morning when I was 9 and had a 104-degree fever. The man who sat in the bleachers at every single one of my track meets, even the ones where I finished last. The man who, when I told him I wanted to stay in Columbus instead of going to the school in Boston, said simply, "Then stay. We'll make it work here." That was the man I thought about. The next morning, I called the company's HR coordinator and asked her to pull my personnel file. Not for any reason she needed to know about. I just wanted to see my records. My hire date, my promotions, the documentation of the work I had done. I needed to see it on paper. I needed to feel the weight of what was real. Then I called a family attorney. Not our family's attorney. Someone I found on my own. I explained the situation generally, without many details, and asked what my options were if someone were attempting to use personal information to challenge my standing in a family-owned business. She asked me one question. Do you have documentation of your contributions to the company? I told her I did. She said, then you're not as exposed as whoever did this wants you to think. I held on to that. 2 weeks passed. Derek said nothing more about the photograph. He acted as if he hadn't given it to me at all. He came to the office twice, both times to talk to my father about a property investment he wanted the company to back. My father listened politely and said he'd think about it. Derek left both times looking like a man who had expected a different answer. I watched my mother during those 2 weeks. She was quiet in a way she usually wasn't. My mother is a talker. She fills rooms with conversation the way some people fill rooms with furniture. But in those 2 weeks, she called me less, and when she did call, the conversations were shorter. She asked surface questions. How's the office? How's the apartment? She didn't ask anything that would require me to tell the truth. I didn't bring it up with her either. I was waiting, not for permission, for clarity. The clarity came on a Thursday afternoon in March. My father asked me to come to his office after hours. Just us. He said he wanted to go over the Q1 route performance numbers, which was a normal enough request. I didn't think anything of it until I walked in and saw that he'd closed the blinds, which he never does, and that there were 2 cups of coffee already poured, and that he looked like a man who had been rehearsing something. He asked me to sit down. He said, I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. I said, okay. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at me. He said, I know what Derek did. Your mother told me about the photograph. I want you to hear this from me directly. He paused. I have always known from the time you were born that you are not biologically mine. The room was very quiet. He said, your mother and I went through a very hard period before you were born. I'm not going to put the details on her here because they're not mine to give. What I will tell you is that when you came into the world, I made a decision. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. You were my son from the first day I held you, and that has never changed, and it will never change. I didn't say anything for a long time. He said, I should have told you years ago. That was my mistake. I didn't know how, and then time made it feel impossible, and I am sorry for that. I asked him one question. I asked if the company, my role, my future there, was affected by any of this. He looked at me steadily and said, I had a conversation with our attorney 8 months ago. Your name is in the succession documents, not as a courtesy, as the primary operational successor. That was decided based on what you have built here, and it is not going to change. 8 months ago, 4 months before Derek handed me that photograph. My father had already seen it coming. I thought about Derek finding the photograph, or maybe commissioning it, tracking down whatever loose thread my mother had left somewhere in her past, and deciding to use it. I thought about him walking into that birthday dinner with the envelope in his jacket pocket, smiling at everyone, pouring himself a drink, waiting for the right moment to hand it to me like it was nothing, like it was just a passing thought. I thought about what he expected to happen, me going quiet, me pulling back, me feeling like I had no ground to stand on. He didn't know the ground had already been reinforced. I didn't confront Derek. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect confrontation to look loud, to look like an argument, a scene, someone storming out. That's not what happened. What happened was slower and more permanent. 3 weeks after my conversation with my father, the company held its annual operations review. It's a meeting where all division managers present their numbers, their challenges, their forecasts for the next quarter. My father chairs it. I run the agenda. Derek had asked to be included this year. He'd sent an email to my father's assistant saying he wanted to present some ideas for new expansion into freight brokerage. My father said fine. Derek presented for about 12 minutes. His slides were surface level. He'd clearly put them together quickly, relying on industry language without understanding the operational specifics underneath it. When he finished, my father asked him 3 questions. What's the current owner-operator ratio in our southern fleet? What's our fuel hedge position for Q3? What's the average dwell time at our Louisville hub? Derek didn't know any of the answers. My father thanked him for his time. Then I presented our Q1 numbers. Our Southern Division had cut costs by 8.3%. Our driver retention rate was the highest it had been in 6 years. We had secured a new warehouse partnership in Nashville that was going to reduce our relay times by nearly a full day. I had the data, the context, and the projections. When I finished, my father said, "This is why the company works." He wasn't looking at Derek when he said it, but Derek was looking at me. It wasn't the face of someone who was angry. It was the face of someone who had just understood for the first time that the thing he thought was a weapon had been taken apart quietly, in a room he wasn't invited to, long before he tried to use it. I called my mother the following Sunday. I didn't call to have the conversation she was afraid of. I called because she's my mother, and because I had spent enough time carrying something in silence to know that silence doesn't protect anyone. It just delays things. She cried almost immediately. She kept saying she was sorry. I let her say it. I didn't rush her past it, and I didn't tell her it didn't matter. What I said, when she was ready to listen, was that I had made my peace with it, that the man who raised me had shown me every day what it meant to choose someone, and that I understood now more than ever that being chosen matters more than biology. She asked if I hated her. I told her no. I told her I needed time to process, and that was honest, but I also told her that I wasn't going anywhere. She asked about Derek. I said that was between him and his own conscience. What I didn't say, because it wasn't the moment for it, was what I had already quietly put in motion. I had begun transitioning into a co-leadership role with my father, formally documented, announced to the management team. I had started bringing in a logistics consultant to help modernize 2 of our regional hubs. I was being introduced to our major clients not as the operations director, but as Gerald's successor. Derek had no seat at that table, not because I took it from him, because he had never done the work to earn one, and because the man whose name was on the building had made sure that when the time came, the right person was standing in the right place. My father pulled me aside about a month later, after a long day at the office. We were walking through the parking lot to our cars. He stopped for a moment and looked out at the building like he was seeing something inside it that I couldn't see. Then he said, "I've been thinking about what Derek did with the photograph." I waited. He said, "I want you to know something." I wasn't surprised by it. Derek has always wanted what he thought was owed to him. What I am sorry about is that you had to be the one standing in the kitchen with that photograph. I told him I wasn't angry about it anymore. He nodded. Then he said something I haven't forgotten. He said, "I chose you the first day I held you. I have chosen you every day since. That's not biology. That's just what love looks like when it's real." We stood there for another moment. Then we got in our cars and drove home. Derek has not come back to the office since the operations review. My mother told me he's been talking about moving to Denver, about starting something of his own, about having ideas he wants to pursue. I hope he does. I mean that without any bitterness. I hope he finds something that is genuinely his, built by his own hands, and that it teaches him what that actually feels like. Because this is what I know now. On the other side of everything that happened, the thing Derek handed me in that envelope was not a weapon. It was a question I had been afraid to ask for 15 years. And the answer, when it finally came, in a quiet office with 2 cups of coffee and a man who'd never once made me feel like anything other than his son, was not what Derek intended. It was the clearest thing I had ever heard. Some people spend their whole lives trying to make you feel like you don't belong. Like you're standing in a house that isn't yours, in a family that will one day take back what they think they only loaned you. They sharpen that doubt and wait for the right moment to hand it to you. What they don't account for is what happens when you already know who you are. When the man who raised you already built the foundation before anyone had a chance to pull it out from under you. I belong here. I always have. Not because of blood, because of 31 years of showing up and being chosen every single morning by the man whose name I carry. And that is something no envelope in the world can take away. There is a certain kind of person who believes that the truth is a weapon. They hold it quietly, waiting for the moment when you look the most stable, the most settled, the most sure of yourself, and then they hand it to you and watch to see what breaks. Derek thought he was handing me something that would undo me. What he didn't understand was that the truth had never been the dangerous part. The dangerous part was silence, and I had already survived 15 years of that. What I've learned, living through everything that happened, is that the consequences we face in life are almost never random. They are the accumulated weight of the choices we make, day after day, in moments nobody is watching. Derek spent years showing up only when there was something to take. I spent years showing up because the work mattered to me, because the man who built something deserved to see it carried forward with care. Those are not equivalent paths, and eventually, the distance between them becomes impossible to ignore. That's not luck. That's not fate in any mystical sense. That is simply the architecture of effort. You build something quietly and consistently, and it holds. You neglect it, expecting it to be handed to you, and when the moment of reckoning arrives, there is nothing underneath you. I think about the photograph Derek handed me, and I think about what he imagined it would do. He thought it would make me feel like a stranger in my own life. What it actually did was force me to look directly at something I had been circling for years, and to realize that the answer, when I finally sat across from my father and heard it plainly, was not the wound Derek intended. It was a window into how deliberately I had been loved, into how much a person can choose someone every single morning without ever needing blood to justify it. That is the thing about integrity. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. Gerald never once made me feel like a debt he was repaying or a burden he had accepted. He just showed up. He just chose. And in doing so, quietly and without ceremony, he gave me the most durable thing a person can give another person, the knowledge that I was worth choosing. I am not the same person I was standing in that kitchen holding an old photograph. I am clearer. I am less afraid of the things people think can be used against me. Because I understand now that the only thing that can truly destabilize you is the absence of self-knowledge, when you know who you are, not by blood, not by what someone else decided about you, but by the work you have done and the love you have accepted and returned. There is no envelope in the world that can reach you. Marcus walked out of that story standing, not because nothing hurt, because he never stopped building while it did.